Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Peter Bauer, CEO of Nasdaq-listed Mimecast, joins me to discuss how the role of cybersecurity has accelerated and evolved as many companies are operating in a remote environment. Peter, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks for having me on the show.
And tell us a little bit about Mimecast.
Great. So Mimecast is a cybersecurity company that is international. We service about 38,000, almost 39,000 customers, and we're best known for our advanced email security solutions. Although our suite covers a broad spectrum of cybersecurity issues, that is one of the principal areas that we focus on, and really has been the #1 attack vector in cybersecurity now for quite a number of years.
How did COVID-19 impact Mimecast?
Well, Joel, I think the way it's impacted our customers has been particularly interesting. What we've seen, and we put out some research papers on this from a threat research point of view. In fact, a recent paper was called 100 Days of Coronavirus, and another one called The State of Email Security. That was really a research report that showed the increased intensity in the cyber attack activity, adversarial activity going on around COVID-19. And that really intersects with a couple of things that I think we've all become quite familiar with, which is the whole work from home dynamic, where you have employees who are increasingly in a remote, unsupervised work environment where the lines between personal and professional blur a lot. And also a world where businesses are frankly a lot more fragile. The economy is a lot more fragile. And so there's a susceptibility to cyber attacks. There's a very important imperative to avoid cyber attacks because of the fragility of the economy and the fragility of businesses generally, as well as adversaries realizing that crime pays, and when the economy faces a downturn and they've got time on their hands too, the intensity and the opportunity for cybercrime has increased.
So how should companies be thinking about cybersecurity now that a majority of their workforce are working remotely for the unforeseeable future, and many employees may want to work from home or in a hybrid environment, even on the other side of COVID-19?
It's a great question, Joel, and we get asked this a lot, is what should organizations prioritize? What should they really think about? And I think initially a lot of the focus was on remote worker enablement and more from an IT and infrastructure perspective. But very quickly realizing that those workers sitting in those remote environments may be your last line of defense. They may be the people whose decisions and judgment means the difference between a breach or a cyber incident and not. So one of the key aspects of our solution that we've been talking to customers about is this area of security awareness training. And we deliver a module that makes it really effective for an organization to get their employee base to become allies in the security program, as opposed to what is frequently thought of as the weakest link. The obvious stuff still applies, the basics. Make sure that you have extremely robust technologies in place that prevent impersonation attacks, phishing attacks, malware, even common spam from landing up in the mailbox, because the mailbox is trusted. People assume now that that is their source of information from the company. That is their lifeline in terms of connectivity to the organization. And that is really one of the areas that attackers have really focused in terms of capitalizing on that trust and attention that the mailbox now has, as we're all so much more dependent on this digital communication, making sure that that is secure.
Well, Peter, we only hear about massive cybersecurity breaches in the news. Tell us about the reality of what companies like Mimecast do and all the breaches that you have halted. We never hear that part of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, we hear about Twitter because Twitter's famous and a lot of famous people are impacted by it. You know, we hear about an organization that might have tons of personal information being compromised, but you know, the real story is actually a lot more tragic than that. It's small and medium-sized companies, frequently targeted because they're part of the supply chains of larger organizations. They are quite often the weak link, and the way in which attackers are going after them, compromising those organizations, disrupting them. In many cases, you're seeing smaller healthcare organizations, medium-sized healthcare organizations, targeted, impacted by ransomware, town governments, important service providers in our lives that not only process and have our data, but also provide essential services to us. And again, when you look at it through the lens of fragility that the world is in and has been for several months now as a state, it's really quite impactful. And the story is a lot broader than the headlines that we read about each day.
Well, certainly cybersecurity trends have been accelerated as we're in a remote working environment. So to wrap up here, what does the future of cybersecurity look like?
Well, I think what we're facing, as you know, when we talk to our customers, is with economic pressures and with the imperative to have leaner budgets and smaller teams. There's really a lot of pressure around simplifying cybersecurity, making sure that it's affordable, and moving away from a situation where you can really have a point solution or an individual product that's trying to tackle every single different use case or every single different threat independently. And what we're involved in is a number of conversations with organizations of all sizes, and particularly very large ones, where the complexity has become overwhelming, and managing that under economic pressures, and managing that with smaller teams or teams that have to work remotely, means that the design of their IT architecture becomes really important. Having something really well integrated, having a selection of suites and platforms that talk to each other and work well together to create a smarter cybersecurity architecture, a smarter overall system, and makes those teams that they have able to be a lot more agile and a lot more responsive.
All right, Peter, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Great. Thanks, Jill.
And thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.